Welcome to all of our Stand Up Australia viewers and to my Substack viewers and to anyone else who happens to watch this. My name is Robin Tudor, and on behalf of Stand Up Australia, I would like to introduce to you the amazing Kathleen Kauth. Sorry, I didn't check the pronunciation of your name. Did I get that right?
That's exactly correct. Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I passed the first hurdle of the interview. So the reason that I wanted to speak to you was because you reached out to me to let me know that you had been elected to the Senate of Nebraska, and that you had actually written a bill. And I'm going to have you talk about that bill in more detail a little bit later, but let's just say I think it's on a subject that is very near and dear to the hearts of a lot of our viewers. Before we launch into this, I do just want to have you introduce yourself to the audience. So before you became a senator for the state of Nebraska, what did you do? Like, what's your background?
So I actually have a graduate degree in public policy, an undergraduate degree in criminology. And for the last 25 years, I've done consulting. When my first child was born, we were very far away from family. And so I moved into consulting and doing contract work so I could be home with him. And then had a couple more kids. We moved around the country quite a little bit. Omaha, Nebraska is our 7th location. And the projects that I was doing with companies were happening because they had so much conflict on their staffs that they weren't getting their work done. And I got a degree in mediation. And so I work with organizations to help them untangle dysfunction, to work better together. And I work with corporate level staff, so C-level people, to teach them how to develop a conflict positive environment, because you should be able to talk to people about difficult subjects and work through conflicts. And what we find out is that there's a lot of middle school dynamics in organizations. And so I do that. And then I do elder care mediation as well.
Wow. I was going to joke that a degree in criminology was a sufficient educational background to enter government.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Criminology plus conflict mediation. That seems like the perfect combination of skills.
It is. And actually, as rough as this session got, because of the bills that I introduced, understanding how to deal with conflict and different personalities was actually very, very beneficial.
Yes, this is going to be so interesting for our audience. Okay, so Nebraska, I must confess, I had to look it up on the map, and so I thought I would actually share the map. Hang on a moment, I've got to find the right tab. Let's see now, and it's actually showing the map. Yes,
it's perfect.
Oh, great. It's actually showing something different on my Zoom screen. All right, so here is Nebraska, right here, almost kind of like in the middle of the United States. Okay, so for all of my Australian viewers who are like, where's Nebraska? Okay, now you know. Okay, so
we are affectionately known as flyover country.
Yes,
because as they go from coast to coast, they fly over us.
I was going to raise that point because I first heard that term flyover state some time ago and thought, what does that mean? And then I realized, oh yes, in the United States, anyone who's anyone is either on the East Coast or the West Coast, and then there's the big hill that you just fly over. So I do want you to tell our audience a little bit about Nebraska, but I'm going to tell you the 3 things that I know about Nebraska, okay? 3 things I know about Nebraska, one of which could, and possibly 2 of which, could turn out to have an interesting tie-in with our subject matter. Okay, number 1 thing I know about Nebraska. Penny, the waitress, would-be actor from The Big Bang Theory, came from Nebraska, okay? Second thing I know about Nebraska, the Franklin cover-up scandal, which was, so the Franklin cover-up scandal, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, was...
I've only been here about 11, not even 11 years. And I started reading about that. I didn't hear about it until about 1.5 years ago. And there's a book by the person who was prosecuting that. And it's fantastic.
Yes. Yes, I actually saw a documentary. So for those in our audience who haven't the faintest idea what we're talking about, this was an allegation of basically a child prostitution ring that was centered in Omaha, Nebraska, where boys were recruited from. It's Boys Town, wasn't it? It's like a reform school.
It is. So that Father Flanagan started it 100 some years ago for a home for troubled boys. It was based around it was a farm, and they worked, and that was kind of how they helped these kids back on track. And it's morphed and changed over the years. And in the 90s, this is when this was going on.
Yes. So the allegation was that boys from Boys Town were recruited into this child prostitution ring, and the people running it were really high-ranked members of the Republican Party. And it brought down the Franklin Credit Union, which was involved in, essentially, as I understand it, money laundering for this disgusting operation. And if memory serves, he was a former FBI agent, John DeCamp, who investigated this, wrote a book about it, and then the whole thing was dismissed as an elaborate hoax. And I actually saw a documentary about it that had been made by, I'm blanking on whether it was BBC or ITV or Channel 4. It was a British TV station. And it was actually, it was never screened. So what I saw was like a rough cut, because the channel pulled it. So yes, second thing I know about Nebraska is the Franklin cover-up scandal.
It was a horrific story.
Yeah, truly, unbelievably horrific and disturbing. And it wasn't just that these boys were recruited, well, the allegation anyway, was that they were recruited into child prostitution. There was a lot of drug abuse and drug trafficking and getting the kids hooked on drugs involved as well. So,
and it wasn't just recruiting them, there were also kidnapping. So my husband grew up in Iowa, in Des Moines, and a young man he went to school with was kidnapped. He was one of the two paper boys who was kidnapped in the 80s. He is mentioned in the Lincoln Scandal book as being someone who was kidnapped and put into this prostitution ring. So it is a horrific, horrific story.
It is just beyond disturbing. And with the release of Sounds of Freedom, I think a lot more people are getting this on their radar, like it or not. The third fact I know about Nebraska is that on the afternoon of September 11, George W. Bush was flown on Air Force One to the Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, Nebraska, where by sheer coincidence, Warren Buffett was hosting a charity golf tournament, and apparently W was flown there for his safety.
Yes, that was because we're in the center of the country, and we didn't know what kind of an attack it was. And so they grabbed him from Florida, flew him here. And this Offutt Air Force Base is where the president is brought in case of an attack until they figure out what's going on. It had nothing to do with Warren Buffett. I mean, Warren Buffett is here, but on that day, it was strictly to get the president away from the coast, again, because we didn't know if there were missiles coming. We didn't know what was happening.
And no one's going to point a missile at Nebraska because, like, no one even knows it's there.
Yeah, yes. I was actually living in Kansas and giving birth that day.
Oh, your baby.
My second son was born that day. It was a scheduled induction, and that was my older sister and my grandmother's birthday. So we had picked that day. And when everything happened, when the towers were hit, my husband wanted to push it off a day. I said, absolutely not, because he was in the military. We didn't know if he would get called up immediately or what was going to happen. And I was bound and determined that terrorists were not going to change my personal plans for my son to be born on my sister's birthday. So,
well, that is quite the
stuff.
Yes. Goodness. All right. So that's all I know about Nebraska. Now,
tell us a lot. You're good. We have a lot of cows and a lot of corn.
Right. So Nebraska's economy is based on agriculture. Well, what's roughly the population?
About 2 million, just under 2 million, and we have a large state. To drive from one to the other is about 7.5 hours, and that's on a highway. So it's a very, very big state. A lot of it is agriculture. We have two major they're not major metropolises. It's Omaha, and then Lincoln is about half the size of Omaha. And then as you go further west, the bigger cities get a little bit smaller each way.
Gotcha. Okay, so big state geographically, small population, large agricultural base. I'm guessing politically it leans Republican then?
It does. It's for the most part a conservative state until you get to the cities where the universities are. And so that is, and so we also have a large our business economy, we're a great state for insurance companies to do business. We have really, really good regulations for insurance companies. We have a lot who are headquartered here, insurance and financial services companies. Yes. So those are headquartered in Nebraska and Omaha and Lincoln primarily.
And now brings to mind the insurance data that Ed Dowd was discussing. And what did he say? Yes. So he was talking about major life insurance companies that were based out of Omaha. Right. Pieces are coming together in my mind. Okay, so why did you decide to run for the Senate? Like, what was your motivation to enter politics? What issues did you campaign on? What was your intention? What did you want to achieve?
So you and I met in the middle of the COVID nonsense, in the middle of forced masking and the vaccine mandates. I was very, very passionate about the fact that they were forcing us to do things that these are not healthy vaccines. They're not even vaccines. And the fact that they were using both a carrot and a stick so heavily really raised the red flags for me. The research I did in them said this: I have no risk from COVID. My kids have no risk from COVID. It's not as bad as they. So the fact that we had so much gaslighting about it really got me to start paying attention. In October of 2021, I brought Peter McCullough to Lincoln along with Petty. I can't remember his name. Dr. Petty. He is he deals with masks, and he is the HVAC guy. And he's like, masks do not work. He is a physicist who studies this. That's all he does. And he has several videos out proving that a mask will not protect you from a virus, even the N95s. Yes. So I brought him and Dr. McCullough, and then we had a constitutional attorney talking to people at the University of Nebraska Lincoln campus, because at that time, the campus had a vaccine passport system in place. And I had been advocating for several months, getting people together, showing up at our regents board meetings to protest the fact that they had vaccine passports on campus. And what was really most upsetting about that is the kids didn't know. These college students who are in their 18 to 24, they're like, well, it's a bit of a hassle and it bothers me. But if I don't do it, I can't go take my test. If I don't do it, I can't get into class. In our country, we have the free right of movement. So for them, and trying to educate these students that this is not just an inconvenience, this is them removing your rights and telling them, you are only valued and able to move if we say you are healthy enough. That's not acceptable. And especially since
we're healthy. Like, what a narrow definition of health.
Exactly.
These passports had nothing to do with health. They were simply evidence that you had or had not had an injection.
Exactly.
Isn't it disturbing, though, that young adults who are at a tertiary institution, right, where, I don't know, I grew up thinking that universities were about encouraging young people to think. Yeah. Remember that when that was a thing, and to think that they just went, oh well, it's a bit of a hassle, but what do? We just have to go along to get along.
And part of that problem is that these kids had worked really hard to get their grades. They had worked, saved money, or taken out loans, or they had so much riding on this, and they didn't understand. I mean, because in this country it is so very directed at, you've got to get your degree, and you're not really valued in the workforce until you have at least a 4-year degree. And so that is really conditioned, but our degrees have taken a hit because we're pushing so many people through and making it easier and easier to get them. or giving
lowering
them
the standards in order to keep up the graduation rate.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, man, there's a whole lot of tangents we could
there's a
go,
lot.
you know, with the recent Supreme Court decision striking down affirmative action. I mean, that's it. But we'll save that for another conversation. Okay.
Robin and Kathleen show.
Yeah, man. Well, we've got a lot of topics that we could cover, which I think would be of great interest. But yes, trying to keep myself on track. So you're talking. You've been talking about the policies within the university. What about Nebraska as a whole? Like, what was the state of Nebraska's COVID response? You know, did they have lockdowns? You know, were schools closed? Were there mask mandates, jab mandates? Yeah.
So Nebraska as a whole, so in our country, we focus very much on local control.
Yep.
A lot of states said, oh no, the state is in charge and we're locking everything down, like Michigan, California, New York. Nebraska said our state is open for business. Nothing that has to do with state government. You cannot be forced to wear a mask. Our governor at that time, Governor Ricketts, did a really, really good job of keeping us open and saying, nope, your freedoms cannot be removed from you because of this. You know, they made sure that, you know, if these things were going on, it had to be done at the local level. So Omaha had mask mandates, which I also was, you know, protesting and speaking out against. And you could tell the different communities that, so I actually went to a different community to shop. So I'm very close to grocery stores in a different county, and you didn't have to wear a mask. And I kept my kids working. My son actually worked at a grocery store in the county where you didn't have to wear a mask. And somebody yelled at him one day because he didn't have a mask on his shoes. You know, that people got that righteous anger, like they're going to make sure that everyone is healthy and safe and you have to do what they say. She yelled at him and he said, ma'am, we're in Sarpy County. There's no mask mandate here. She was on the verge of calling the police.
Isn't that sensational, though, that he was able to just stand his ground and be polite
and very polite and very calm.
Show respect to the customer, but just state the facts, state the law. You know, if you want to wear a mask, it's up to you. Knock yourself out or suffocate yourself. Yeah, your choice. But it's not the law, and so I'm not doing it. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So you did have some crazy maskers in Nebraska. It wasn't all like, you know, gun toting.
No.
We're not going to wear the mask. No, there were some people who were right into it. Okay, well, I guess that happens everywhere. Yeah, and
do you want to meet somebody real quick? Brandon, come here. My son, who was born on 9/11.
Yeah.
Say hi to Robin. She's in Australia. This is
hello. Just hearing about this wonderful story of you dealing with let's just say a pro-masker. So yeah. Congratulations on standing your ground. Terrific.
Thank you.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, man, that is quite the birthday though, isn't it? Wow. Yeah. So okay, I know that I can't keep you forever today. You have another engagement. So let's talk about this bill. Let's talk about the what was the name of this bill and tell our listeners about the subject matter and go for it.
So a year ago, the senator for my district, he was in almost the end of his second year and he passed away unexpectedly. So I decided to run for his seat. So I was appointed for the short term and then had to campaign and run for his seat and get elected to the last 2 years of his term. As I was going door to door, people would say, you know, what are you most passionate about? My response was pushing back on federal overreach, because at that time, the Biden administration had decided that if schools did not have gender inclusive programs, which meant that girls would have to share locker rooms and bathrooms with boys and vice versa, and boys could play on girls' sports teams, then their free and reduced lunch funding would be pulled from the school by the federal government. So to me, that is
no idea.
That happened in May, and that is extortion on a federal level to force cultural change. and in our country.
Not to mention that is a direct attack on the
Absolutely.
safety and the freedom of girls. The freedom of girls to not be subjected to sexual harassment, basically. I mean, no adolescent girl wants to be, in a change room and have a male with his genitalia intact walking through her change room while she is getting changed, let alone competing on a sports team with a male with all the.
And the other thing is, boys are at huge risk for this, because when girls are in their locker rooms changing, teenage boys do not always say the right thing. And when you have someone who's in there who's already proven that they feel like a victim, they feel like they're special. If a boy says the wrong thing, looks the wrong way, is uncomfortable in any way, shape, or form, and makes that person feel uncomfortable, that boy is at risk for being targeted. It's just, you should never put kids in a situation that is so far beyond their maturity level to handle. And so this affects boys and girls.
Thank you for raising that. That's actually a really important point. It puts boys at risk as well, a different kind of risk, but still a risk.
Totally different kind of risk. Absolutely. But a risk nonetheless, and especially with the cancel culture that we have now. And that goes for both boys and girls, if they are uncomfortable with this happening, they're the ones who are told they have a problem. They are not given, they are not listened to, they are not, why aren't you supportive? Why aren't you an ally? Ally is one of those key words that means you don't really get to have a stance on it. As a conflict mediation, I use the phrase weaponized compassion.
Yes, 100%. And ally is a weaponized term, isn't it? It's a highly weaponized term. So what was the response by, when you were door knocking, when you were speaking to people about these issues, what was their response?
Nobody knew about it. It was one of those things, just people don't pay attention the same way. And it was just slid under, just passed on by. I had heard about it because I pay attention to that stuff. And so when I would talk about it, like, no, that can't possibly be. And I'd pull it up like, look, here's the executive order. Our state attorney general filed a lawsuit about it. At that point, I had been appointed, and so I was able to start a bill to work on that. But as I talked with people and explained what was going on, I heard more and more, I don't want, guys and my daughters, I'd have people answering the door with little kids going, well, that's not okay. And teenagers in the background that you should just see their parents like processing.
Yes.
That is not okay.
Not okay. Not okay. Did I send my child to school and they be subjected to this? Right. And what is held over the school's head is, we will take money away from you if you don't go along with this.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah, that's bad. So as a state, we have to decide for ourselves. That's called federalism, what it is we want to do. If it's not in our Constitution, the state decides. And so, as I talked to people, and then I started learning more about the push, this gender dysphoria push, and how much kids are being pressured to, if they feel uncomfortable in their bodies at all, which that's called puberty.
That's called going through, that's called being a teenager, right? Like standing in front of the mirror for hours at a stretch going, my nose isn't right. And like, my friend has larger breasts than me, or for boys, like, my friend has larger genitalia than me. Yeah. Right.
Well, and when I was in high school and middle school, it was eating disorders. A few years later, it was cutting. And a few years later, it was something else. And now it's gender dysphoria. So we are seeing exponentially increasing cases.
Absolutely. And even within eating disorders, it went from anorexia to bulimia. Right? So there was actually overeating. Yes. So there was a shift in the nature of the eating disorder that became a social contagion. And then, yes, you're right, cutting replaced eating disorders as a social contagion. And now we're seeing that exact same demographic that was afflicted by the eating disorders and the cutting.
Girls. Yeah. And here's the thing, if you were a psychiatrist and you had someone come in who was a young woman who is obviously underweight, and that girl looked at you and said, I know I'm fat, but I'm really skinny on the inside. I want liposuction and diet pills. If you wrote out that prescription or passed them along to a surgeon, you would have your license pulled. That's what's happening. These are mental health issues.
It's so simple.
On by the medical industry.
Yep. Mm. Yeah. Disturbing on so many levels. Yeah. So this then led to the tell us about the bill. Yeah.
So basically, as I delved into the first bill I have is called Sports and Spaces, and that deals with no biological males on female teams, and boys and girls don't share each other's locker rooms and bathrooms, K through 12. That one got pushed off till next year, but I will still be pursuing it. Because I also introduced one called Let Them Grow, and that was LB 574, because the issue of surgery, puberty blockers, and cross-sex hormones has to come first. Because what's happening is people are saying, well, of course these kids can play sports because we've had them on puberty blockers since they were 8. They will start pushing this younger and younger and younger to achieve the sports or to achieve the passing.
To be able to say, oh, this person has no advantage because even though he was born a male, we've actually put him on puberty blockers, so he didn't go through puberty, therefore he isn't bigger.
Which doesn't work. They don't work. They're so exceptionally dangerous. They've never been studied for gender dysphoria. They are not FDA approved. Lupron, which is made by AbbVie, had a huge settlement because it was supposed to be used for precocious puberty. That's what it was FDA approved for. And it did so much damage to the children who were.
Yeah, we're talking about decreased bone density. We're talking about
hypothalamus not developing, heart disease, kidney disease, liver. I mean, all of the endocrine systems not functioning well. You cannot just stop your body from living and growing and developing.
You can't just intervene in a complex biological process like that and think that there are going to be only positive consequences flowing from that. It is, the word insanity gets overused a lot because it implies that the people pushing this are just crazy. And I don't think they're crazy. I think they're really bad people. I mean, this goes so far past crazy.
In this country, it is a $5 billion a year industry.
Break that down for us. Where does that money come from?
One thing, if you have medications that have not been FDA approved, they're used off-label, which means they can charge way more. So a month of puberty blockers is about $7,000.
Who pays for that?
Well, the insurance companies do, which I don't understand why. I'm trying to attack that as well. Some states, Medicaid, which is for people who are poor who need medical care, some states pay for it. Now, the thing is, this is not medically necessary care because it's always coded as a mental health issue because that's how they get it paid for. So they claim it's not mental health, but they're saying that it is for insurance reasons so that they get it's very murky, and I don't quite understand how they're getting away with what I can say.
Because on the one hand, they are denying that it's gender dysphoria. They're saying that these people are genuinely trans, whatever that means, and that it's not gender dysphoria because gender dysphoria would be, as you say, that's a mental health problem.
They completely created their own construct where they are the only ones who know the rules, and they interpret those rules however they want.
Yeah. So you've got the drugs, and then of course there's the surgery.
Right. So the puberty blockers and the cross-sex hormones, and which these are irreversible, no matter how nice of a package you put on it. And I had a couple detransitioners come and speak in the hearings for my bill. Luca Hine is a young woman who was here in Omaha. And do you know Luca? So she was 15 and having mental health crises. She was getting treatment at our university medical center. She mentioned the word trans one time. By the time she was 16, they had cut off her breasts and put her on testosterone. And within a couple of months, she realized that wasn't the problem. And she stopped the testosterone. Her voice will always be lower. She will never have breasts. She doesn't know if she'll be able to have children. This is and she is so brave because she came and testified for me, and the doctor who coordinated her care was testifying against us in the same room. And so she was so
own patient whom he had harmed, and he did not acknowledge the harm.
It was a female doctor.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was my assumption. Okay, this is wild.
Oh, so I think it was but it just really.
So the doctor who did this to her refused to acknowledge the harm that she had done to a vulnerable adolescent. Yeah.
And brought other patients in and other doctors in. Again, everyone who testified against my bill, who was in the medical profession, were making money from doing these procedures.
Direct conflict of interest.
Testified in support of my bill, had a stake in the game other than seeing that this is wrong.
Yeah.
So, and the way I wrote this bill, we banned the surgeries and these medications under the age of 19. So in the state of Nebraska, 19 is the age of majority. And what we're trying to say is the phrase, let them grow. Let these kids grow up, give their brains more time to develop, because they cannot make these kinds of decisions. They don't have the brain power to understand a lifetime of pain, disfigurement, and everything else that goes along with this.
The loss of sexual function, the loss of function.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, when they're talking to them about this, kids don't understand that kind of sexual function. Ooh, gross. Yeah. No, I want to be nothing.
Yes. I mean, that's part of the confusion that they're going through, and the sense of being not connected to their bodies that they're going through. Because, what is adolescence? It's the transition from being a child, which by definition is a not sexual state, although they're attempting to redefine which is its whole other level of absolutely disturbing stuff. Are you familiar with James Lindsay?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So he's got a podcast called New Discourses, and I was just listening to an episode. He's done a whole series on what he calls groomer schools. If you haven't come across this yet, I mean, don't listen to it at night because it's really disturbing. But we're talking about a curriculum developed by UNESCO, which they want to implement internationally. And one of the objectives of this is to be talking to prepubertal children about sexual pleasure. I'm sorry, that has no place in discussions with a child who hasn't gone through puberty. And even when you're talking to children who have gone through puberty about it, I mean, like you say, it's a really sensitive subject. It's embarrassing. They go, ooh, So the idea that this is going to be discussed in a classroom where some teacher is going to be standing up the front of the class and saying, sex should be really pleasurable. Like, okay, have that conversation with adults, or at least people who are cognitively more mature. But if I had children of primary school age, we call it primary school, elementary school age, there is no way that I would be enrolling them in public school. I'd be pulling them out and homeschooling them, and pretty much the same for high school. This is just such inappropriate content.
That is something
sexual pleasure discussions for prepubertal children.
And on a national level, national teachers
on an international level, this is what UNESCO is pushing.
Here in this country, are the Department of Education and the national teachers unions are pushing this down on their teachers unions and on schools to implement this. They call it comprehensive sex education, or social emotive learning. And so they're changing the words and changing the meaning of certain programs and words to fit this in under the radar. And in Nebraska, a couple of years ago, when people stayed home with the COVID, and they saw what their kids were learning and they heard more about it, all of a sudden a lot of eyes have been opened. And so pushing back on state boards of education, pushing back on school districts, we're really working very hard to get parents involved.
Because once they find out, I mean, who in their right mind, what parent in their right mind would think that this is okay? I guess if you're just completely ideologically possessed by this strange new religion of wokeism,
Well,
maybe
and remember the
yeah.
weaponized compassion, because so many people said, if you don't support this, you must be a bad person. You must be not compassionate. You must hate these children. The names that I have been called about my bill have been horrific.
Say more about that. So where did the opposition come from? I mean, aside from people who are making money off this barbaric practice, where did the opposition come from?
A lot of our state senators, a lot of the LGBT groups, although I also had gays against groomers. I had LBG groups who were saying, we are not happy about this.
This is a fantastic development, I must say. The rise of groups like Gays Against Groomers, who are really speaking out against basically the invasion of LGB by the T, because the T has nothing to do with the LGB.
The corruption of it, because essentially the T is erasing women, it is erasing men, it is erasing gay, it is erasing lesbian, it is making everything just this big unisex mesh where you can't be who you are, and people don't realize that.
So these so the people in the legislature who were opposed to you, were there Republicans amongst the Democrats, or like what were the party affiliations like?
It was, and so here in Nebraska we have what's known as a unicameral. We only have one house, and it's not a party system. So supposedly there's no partisanship. However, there's very much, people know who they are, generally speaking. And this was my first year. So my first year and all of the other freshman senators, our first year was a huge, huge battle and very, very partisan.
Fire. Right. So you're being attacked by these people, and the LGBT groups, or the T dominated groups. What are these groups, and have you looked into the funding sources? Who's behind?
Yeah, we have a lot of donors who are tied to groups like Soros, or the Susie Buffett funds a lot of this type of the education groups. The Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood is a huge one, because Planned Parenthood is selling the drugs. And here in the States, they say it's just informed consent. So you can walk in with an adult, sign that you understand all the risks, and walk out with puberty blockers, with no anything.
Yeah, so these are people who they can't vote, they can't buy alcohol or cigarettes, they can't join the military, but they can, because they're not old enough, but they can get puberty blockers. Just on the Planned Parenthood thing, this James Lindsay podcast that I was listening to, these comprehensive sexual education materials are actually co-written by Planned Parenthood.
Yes, 100%.
So in other words, they're actually creating the market for their services. So they write the curricula to get children to start thinking that, I'm not a boy, I'm not a girl, I'm the opposite sex, I'm, rather than just confused adolescent. And then they're pushing their own services to these children, so these children can walk in and without their parents knowing, without anybody else knowing, they could just go get themselves some puberty blockers.
Absolutely. It's a little bit like COVID, where they create a issue and then they sell a vaccine. This is dangerous, but we've got the solution. You're sick, you're in the wrong body, but we've got the solution. And here's the problem: when you tell a child whose brain isn't fully developed, you're going to feel so much better. You're going to feel like you, and you don't go into the unbelievably agonizing physical pain and the depth of despair you're going to feel looking at yourself and not recognizing your body. That's not talked about. It's all sunshine and rainbows, and here you go, everything will be fine. And that's not cool.
This whole notion that a person, say, who was born male could possibly know what it's like to be a female, and therefore to know that he wanted to be a female or was truly a female. How could you possibly know?
Offensive. I mean, it would be like me saying, hey, I feel like I'm Black, so I'm Black and you must treat me that way.
Yeah, I identify as Black, yes.
It's very offensive. I mean, one of the things we need to start being better at is correcting the misuse of language. So when people say, you've misgendered this person, they're saying this person wants to be called this way. And if you don't agree with it, you're the one guilty of misgendering. When in reality, someone who is calling themselves by a different gender than their biological sex, they're the ones who are misgendering. Because just because you want to be something different doesn't mean you are.
Doesn't make it so. Indeed. Yes, I mean, children express the desire to be all sorts of things, and their parents just say, well, that's a nice little fantasy that you're having. Isn't it wonderful that you have such a lively imagination? Oh, look at you pretending to be an elephant. Wow, I love the way you make your imaginary trunk swing. You don't go, oh, my kid's an elephant now, because
we don't treat them as an elephant. So yes.
Yeah. Although in the UK, I understand now that there have been multiple reports in UK newspapers about children who identify as cats. And so when the teacher addresses them, they meow. And other students are actually criticized for saying that you're not a cat, right? Because that's
again, that's the weaponized compassion.
Yeah, not affirming their identity as a cat.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Again, is it crazy, or are these people just really bad people who have an agenda to create such disruption and such societal destruction that out of the chaos they can create the order that they want to make.
And I have huge concerns for the next 10 years, and in part of my, as I developed this, as I talked to people, I kept saying Sweden, Finland, Norway, the UK, New Zealand, and Australia are backing away from this. They're saying we were wrong.
Yes and no. It varies state by state in Australia. And some of the most COVID crazy states are going full steam ahead in terms of this. I mean, I just call it how I see it. This is genital mutilation of children. This is an attack on children's bodies and minds. But no, in the state of Victoria, which was the most COVID crazy state, Melbourne, the capital of Victoria, became world famous for having the longest lockdown, and then they re-elected the premier who did this to them.
What happened?
Yeah. Stockholm syndrome has actually been renamed Melbourne syndrome. So in the state of Victoria, if your child decides that he is a she or she is a he, and you as a parent do not affirm them, you're actually at risk of having your child taken away from you by the state because you are clearly psychologically abusing your child by refusing to indulge in their fantasy. That can happen.
That has happened in some states here in Nebraska. In fact, in Minnesota, which is, if you look on the map, up and over just a little bit state-wise, if any child, they're a sanctuary state for transgender children. So any child who crosses state lines can declare themselves that they need help because they're trans and their parents don't support them. Their parental rights are severed, and the state will take them and give them whatever surgery or medicine they want.
Yeah.
That's horrific. And I look at, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, when you say they want, I mean, we know as parents, our children want all sorts of things. They want to stay up. They want to eat junk food. They want to, they want to try smoking. They want to hang out with their friends in dangerous places. And what do you do as a parent? You say no and hell no. Because I'm responsible for you, and you don't have the maturity to be able to think through the consequences of your decisions. And so I'm putting my foot down and saying, you don't get to do that. So now
you're the parent, not the friend. You're the parent, and the parent's job is to put those boundaries in. And when the kids are little, your boundaries are pretty tight. They're little, and then you teach them and you release those boundaries. But with this, they're saying kids as young as 3 can choose what they are. I knew when I had people come and testify and say, I knew when my child was 2.5 that he was a boy. It's a girl. And they're raising them that way. This family also said, we have 2 children who are trans. So statistically, that's impossible.
I was going to say, what are the odds of that? I mean, the figures that I understood to be the case just a few short years ago were that, you know, being genuinely trans was something like a 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000. I'm not sure if anyone has ever
0.003%. And
okay.
now we're at over 2.2%.
Yeah.
Which is a huge percentage. One college in this country, and I can't remember which one it was, but they it's a liberal college, but they report that 38% of their students identify as somewhere in the LGBTQ plus 2 crowd. And so this is social. This is, I want to be with that group who's getting the attention, who's got, support.
Yep. Yeah. And again, the weaponized compassion thing that you talked about. So often these children they're not very socially skilled. As Dr. McCullough has been writing about in his Substack lately, there is a huge overlap between autism and gender dysphoria. And so many of these children, they're not socially skilled. They're really quite unpopular. They're not making it in the friendship stakes. They're not making it in the dating stakes. But if they suddenly announce, I'm trans, suddenly they get this shower of love poured upon them.
Love bombing.
Yeah. You're trans, you're in this sort of protected class now. So no wonder it's attractive to them.
They will then fit, because if you feel like you don't fit and somebody says, here's a secret, here's how you fit, you want that.
Yes. Here's how you fit. You're going to be on pharmaceutical products for the rest of your life that are going to increase your risk of all manner of diseases and almost certainly shorten your life and render you infertile. And we're also going to mutilate your genitals so that you can never have normal sex and experience sexual pleasure. But you'll feel so much better for it. It's so, I wasn't raised a religious person, and I had a real aversion to the word evil before COVID. And now I find myself using the word evil a lot, because I don't know that there's any other word in the English language that really, really rises to the challenge of describing this kind of full spectrum assault on children and teenagers who are still effectively children. I mean, legally, they're still children, right?
Legally, they are. Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So you had these billionaire funded LGBT groups speaking against you. You had other
groups and lots of social media, and the defenses. You've seen it happen. They're very organized. They're very good at rallying the social media and putting out the tweets and putting out and so I stay off social media. I'm not on it. I don't read it. I don't read articles about myself. I don't watch. I don't need kind of negativity and lies. So, the media, and I've talked to several of the reporters about this when they've interviewed me. I always say this bill is about protecting children. And the headline is usually anti-trans bill. This is not anti-trans. This is don't hurt kids. Don't let kids make irreversible decisions that will ruin their bodies forever. Protect children until they're old enough to make those decisions on their own.
Because once they are of the age of majority, they are free to do what they want. If they want to get piercings,
as long as they can afford it and they can live with the consequences, that is their right and responsibility as an adult.
Yep. But you are in no. It's so strange to me that we even have to have this conversation about what is acceptable to subject children to. I really can't get my head around it. How have you personally coped? You mentioned you stay off social media. That's smart. How have you? What's been the impact on your family life? Have your kids been attacked because of your stance?
I think a few comments have been made to my kids, but my kids are all, so I have a 25, the one you met is 21, and then I have a younger one who just turned 20. He was away at his freshman year in college, and my kids have a slightly different last name than me. So it's not like right in your face that this is who I am.
Okay, right.
It helps. So, it's when my husband and I got married, I kept my name. And so I tell him now it gives you plus deniability. I mean, you're so lucky. And he's like, no, and he's wonderful. But, it was stressful, but because I know I'm doing the right thing, I tend not to worry about it. So I've been screamed at and called names. I've been called Hitler. I've been called mean, nasty, homophobe, transphobe, like everything by my fellow senators on the floor.
Wow, so it actually happened in session. People
absolutely on the floor. So collegiality out the door, which I pointed out to a few of them who were screaming about how it was uncollegial for me to bring such divisive measures. These are things that my constituents talked to me about, that the entire state, so a survey was done in our state, 3/4 of the people in this state support my sports and spaces bill, and just slightly under 70% support the Let Them Grow bill. So it's, what the majority of the state says this is important. One of the senators got up and she was frustrated and she said, why are we talking about these cultural issues? So part of the problem was they did a filibuster. And they ran a filibuster the entire session.
Just briefly explain for my Australian audience what a filibuster is.
Basically, and the way our rules were written, nobody had ever done a filibuster like this before. You could filibuster a particular bill to just run out the clock and not let there be actual debate on it. They filibustered every single bill talking about my bill. So they talked about my bill every single day, filibustering, and they were trying to let nothing go through and nothing get discussed. So,
in other words, they're holding up government business.
And they said it on the floor. They said, we want to obstruct everything. We don't care. We're not going to get anything done. We hate this. We hate her. She's horrible. This is not going to, if you don't make this go away. And they were trying to get me to pull the bill.
They wanted you to drop it. I see. So that was the point of the pressure, trying to get you to drop the bill.
And I give huge kudos to my fellow senators who stuck with me, and it was brutal on the floor. It was brutal every day, knowing the nonsense we were going to be forced to endure. But while they were filibustering, the rest of the senators we were working in the backgrounds. We were getting things done. It's not the way we wanted to get our bills passed, but we got significant things passed this year because we worked together to accomplish it over the filibuster. And then we did get my bill passed. It was modified slightly so that instead of banning the drugs, we've directed our chief medical officer to create rules and regulations and do investigation into it to figure out exactly what the safety is. So we've put more steps in place. We've stalled it, but we got 80% there. And we also were able to add a pro-life bill onto it that they had killed. So it was a tumultuous session. And again, for the freshman class, we're like, okay, so this is how you do things here. And we've become pretty battle hardened.
Yes. I suppose that's the advantage of it when your first year is just so tough like that. You're like, okay, so throw the next challenge at me. I'm ready. Right. It can't be worse than this.
And as a mediator, so listening to people yelling or being conflicted, I know exactly how to identify they're making an emotional response.
Thank you for bringing that back in. Tell us how your mediation skills were brought to the fore in this, because I think this is really important. Obviously, all of us who've questioned the COVID narratives, and then for many of us who didn't really look at contentious topics before, our eyes have been opened left, right, and center. And so, there are a lot of people ending up in very heated discussions with friends, family members, colleagues, neighbors. How did you handle this?
Well, first of all, so it was never, I was actually asked by another senator on the floor, trying to kind of trip me up, like, you're a mediator, you should be able to understand. So how would you handle this as a mediator? And my response was, for a mediation to actually work, there need to be two parties who agree that there's a conflict and want to come to a resolution. Okay. We didn't have We had one party who was throwing a temper tantrum because they didn't like what I was doing, but I have every right to do that. I have a responsibility to bring that kind of a bill. And just because somebody like
yeah, this is sorry, just a tangent, but something that I think is really important. If you've got 3/4 of the voters, more or less, like 70% to 74% of the voters in your state who are in favor of it, what the hell are these representatives doing? Not voting in favor of what their own constituents want. And of course, we're seeing this all over the world, where the people are looking at their supposed elected representatives and saying, you don't represent us, you don't listen to us, you pass bills that we don't agree with, and then when we contact you to say we don't agree with it, you blow us off. So it's happening everywhere.
And the minority is extraordinarily loud and very, like I said,
loud,
very
aggressive, abusive. They have these attack teams. It's all right. So you didn't have parties for remediation because they didn't want to agree.
Yeah, exactly. And so if somebody calls you a name, I was called transphobic many times.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Doesn't matter, call me whatever you want, because I'm not going to accept what you tell me I am. And when I do mediation, I talk about the purple elephant. If someone accused you of being a purple elephant, would you in fact be a purple elephant? Would you try to defend yourself against being a purple elephant?
You just look at them and go, I don't know what you're smoking, dude, but I'm not that.
People call you that. That's part of the weaponized compassion, is people are, no, I'm not. And they take a step back and they go on the defensive, which means the other person is going to keep attacking and beat you down. So you just say, no, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit for me. And so, just ignoring it was really, really good. Just let them go.
Okay. This is gold. What you're sharing is gold. I really listen to this, people. Listen to this. When people call you anti-trans or an anti-vaxxer or like whatever crazy thing, what you're saying is you don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to say, no, I'm actually not an anti-vaxxer. I support this, that, or the other vaccine. Or no, I'm not anti-trans. I have a trans friend. You don't have to do any of that. In fact, don't do that. That is 100% the wrong thing to do. Instead, you just go, I'm not that.
Or you just look at them and say, what a weird statement.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
And then you say this, you seem like you're projecting. Yeah. That'll make them crazy.
Oh yeah, I can imagine. That is like beating them at their own game par excellence. This is gold. All right, okay. So you don't engage with the name calling. You don't defend yourself against the name calling. And I suppose, look, let's point something out. When someone makes a criticism of you, a wise person and an honest person does need to pause for a moment and ask themselves, is there anything to this? Do I have some sort of fundamental objection to trans people? Am I anti-gay or whatever? Like, you have to ask yourself that question. Okay, so this
honest and authentic with yourself first. Yep. And if that is secure, then the rest of it is just noise.
Yes. So after you've done that honest inventory of your own beliefs, your own philosophies, and you've maybe asked for the input of wise people and tested your views again in debate, right? This is one of the crucial things. We clarify what we believe by testing our ideas against those of people who have different ideas, right? And if we can manage the debate civilized, we may change we may actually change our own ideas, and that's great. That's fantastic, because debate is the fire that we put our ideas through to test them and toughen them, like iron out the weaknesses in them. So after you've done that process and you figured out, no, I'm actually not trans, I'm not afraid of these people, I don't hate these people, I just want to protect children and their innocence and their right to grow, then you go forth and you use these fabulous techniques. All right, what else did you do that worked?
So one of the things was, as I said, they talked about my bill. They filibustered about 574 every single day, every single minute of every single day. And so it started emailing, why aren't you getting up and defending? Why aren't you, fighting back? Because I refused to engage because we weren't talking about my bill. So in our legislative chamber, we have a board that shows the bill that's being discussed or the amendment, or whatever is supposed to be being discussed is up on the board. And I told the reporters, I'm like, if my bill number is not on the board, we're not discussing it. It's disrespectful to the senator whose bill is on the board. And it's not effective. And quite frankly,
so in other words, you are a stickler for process. You said, this is the process. I am following it. You're not.
Sure.
So
Exactly.
I'm not going to do what you're doing because you're actually not following the correct process. Oh, this is.
And when they would scream about the lack of collegiality or the fact that we were destroying the institution, I would every once in a while get up and respond to that and say, here's what's happening. And you're the one being non-collegial. And what we are learning as freshmen is that this is the way this runs. And so it just, there are times to insert and there are times to just let them go, because the more they sound like crazy people, the less people are going to believe in them.
Are these sessions televised? Is this on C-SPAN or?
Not C-SPAN. So we have Nebraska public media, and it was televised. It was not recorded. So we didn't keep recording of it. We did get one bill passed, LB 254, which was wrapped up into a couple of other bills that will make it recorded and people will be able to go back and look at this. But here, can I share my screen with you real quick?
Yes.
Here,
I need to give permission for that. Let me see.
Yeah, go down to share screen. Click on it, and it says multiple participants.
Yeah, got it. Okay. I'm glad you're more familiar with Zoom than I am.
All right. So on this day, there were about 200 people out in our rotunda, which is kind of the big area.
Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people.
This is Michaela Kavanaugh.
That's what they're saying out there. They're standing in a circle in the rotunda saying that over and over again. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. People belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. Trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people. Trans people belong here. We need trans people. We love trans people.
You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of the ecstatic dance ritual that people engage in religious ceremonies or in cults. You know what I'm talking about, where they kind of work themselves up into a frenzy.
So what was happening here is there were about 200 people out in the rotunda watching. They had screens outside and they were watching from the balconies and they were watching at the doors. She was leading them in the chant and inciting them to make it more aggressive and harder for us. The other thing is, this kind of behavior happened pretty much every day where there was some rant or some craziness. It happened more intensely when the national media was there.
Yeah. Sorry, Kathleen, I'll just get you to turn off your screen share now.
So, there we go.
Perfect. Yeah, right. Now I understand. So this really was cult-like. This was cult-like. She was whipping them up into a frenzy through this chat.
And we had incidents where people, so in our chamber, we have balconies on the sides. We had one day where a gentleman tried to push his way up into the balcony with a very large backpack that smelled very badly. And our state patrol and our sergeant at arms pushed him back and asked to see what was in the backpack. And he turned around and ran. He dumped the contents of the backpack out and then got out of the building. There was a severed deer head that he was going to throw over the balcony. On the final reading, we had protesters in the balcony who were throwing tampons at me as I was speaking. Now, tampons are not aerodynamic and they wound up hitting the senator behind me. So but again, yeah. And they put red paint on them. I doubt very much they were actually used. But
yeah, I was hesitant to even ask whether they were fresh out of the packet or used. It's like, should I even ask that question?
They were trying to make a point, and the thing is,
I'm sorry. What was the point? What could you explain to me? Because they could intimidate. It's too early in the morning for me. I'm just trying to wrap my head around what point is being made by hurling tampons at a woman.
Yeah, they were trying to intimidate, and they were trying to. I mean, again, the loudness, the number of people there, the intensity of the protests. The intensity of the hate that came to not just my email, but all of the other senators' emails who supported these bills, the aggression that we were faced with, it was intense, and it was a tactic to make us back down. And that doesn't work. I mean, that's all of us. No.
Yeah. No, on that note, what do you think about, do you think you already had the kind of personality that makes you up for this fight beforehand? Did COVID change you?
No, it just made me more like willing to do it. But according to my mom, I've always been like this. So I asked her one time, I'm like, so Mom, would I have been labeled oppositionally defiant? She's like, there's a reason I was stricter with you than with your siblings. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, right. Okay. So you already had a pretty strong backbone. And so you came into this fight or already knowing how to defend yourself, and that, when someone comes at you swinging, go, oh, and run away. It tends to make you more up for the fight. Yeah, good for you. I love it. And fortunately, you had enough colleagues who
yes, and that's just it. We had people who stuck with us, and I had people all around the state who were, because I would reach out to the grassroots groups who, the groups that I had developed relationships with in the COVID fight, and say, hey, listen, I need support on this, and they're 100% behind it. I said, so I need you contacting your senator and show them that you love them, that you want this fight, that you know they're taking it on the chin.
And if they vote for this bill, you will vote for them next time.
And just thank you. And so I would have senators come in and say, okay, so the first day after you introduce, I got like tons of hate mail. And then the next day, everybody is responding and saying, thank you for taking this on. And it is important to us. And we had one senator, Senator DeBoer, who's liberal. She was voted against the bill, and she got very frustrated with the filibuster. She just wanted to get like actual work done and didn't like the fact that the filibuster was going. She helped with it at times, but she got very frustrated one day, and she said to the camera, if you think that we should actually be doing these cultural issues, there's this perception that you shouldn't, legislate any kind of cultural thing, which is how the left gets away with getting so much stuff pushed through, because they say, and again, weaponized compassion. This time they're weaponizing your sense of right and wrong. They're saying conservatives shouldn't want to legislate cultural issues. So if you really want us to keep doing this, let us know. But if you want us to stop and focus on other things. And so people sent emails, but they sent them to all 49 senators. So we all saw how many people are saying, yes, we want these cultural battles fought. We want the discussions that we have.
And the idea that you shouldn't be discussing this when actually this is a cultural issue that was pushed on you federally. So why is it okay for the federal government to push its cultural notions on the states, but you at the state level, and obviously you're far more in touch with what the, you know, especially with being such a small state in terms of population, it's much easier to kind of take the pulse of that smaller population and figure out, you know, whether the people are with you or against you on this. How is it not your responsibility as a state senator to enact the will of the people? Yeah, this is wow. Now I know you don't have unlimited time, so tell me how there's a couple more questions. So
10 more minutes.
10 minutes. Okay. Yes. Wonderful. All right. And hopefully we can schedule another conversation because there's so much more that I want to ask. But okay, so what do you personally think? You mentioned gender dysphoria before as being the driver behind all of this. What do you think underlies gender dysphoria?
You know, I think, quite frankly, this is not true gender dysphoria. This is kids responding. This is that social contagion. Hi, guys. Sorry, more of my kids. This is that social contagion that makes people want to fit in. This is because what it used to be that gender dysphoria happened primarily to males. And
yes,
again, that
indeed.
10,000. But now we're seeing primarily preteen and teenage girls who are having this issue, or boys who have never felt like they fit in. Again, the autism spectrum. This is the cultural phenomenon that is being used as a tool to create dependency, to create victims, to create lifelong medical patients, and to try to force the government to be paying for that lifelong medication. Because then, you know, you don't have to have a job. You don't have, because some of these treatments are going to leave you unable to work. You know, it's
when you said the government paying for it, the government doesn't pay for anything. The government doesn't run a business. The government takes money from the people. So that's the people paying for all of this. Yeah. Or you know, the government racking up yet more debt. No one can even wrap their head around the size of the current US deficit. It's too many zeros, and like you start blanking out. Yeah. So do you, because there have been suggestions made that, you know, for instance, some of the endocrine disrupting chemicals that we're all swimming in right now. I mean, you know, Bobby Kennedy Jr. has been talking about this in relation to, in particular, atrazine, but there are plenty more endocrine disrupting chemicals. So there's that potential, you know, avenue of contribution. Sorry.
My dog just barked.
Kids, dogs, joys of working from home. Yeah. So do you suspect that might be playing a role, or
you know, I think it certainly can. I mean, we talk about hormones in milk, hormones in our poultry, our beef, our everything. You see seed companies saying, well, we can create something that has more protein, more, you know, whatever. We're messing with a lot of different natural substances. And so I can't understand how that wouldn't have had an effect. You know, just even the plastics that we are constantly surrounded by, those are endocrine disruptors. And so
the BPA in the you know, the thermal receipts that you get from, you know, the bank or the checkout, all of that.
There are definitely things that are affecting us.
We've seen a precipitous drop in sperm counts in males.
We've seen incredible decreases in pregnancies and in live births. So, you know, there's so much, and that's part of the problem. I think that's why people shut down and don't want to deal with it, because it's so overwhelming when you start talking about, well, there's stuff in our environment, there's stuff in our, you know, our social life, our politics, our, you know, seems like we are under attack from so many different avenues, and it's very difficult to wrap your head around it. I have many friends who just say, you know what, and I can't do politics. I don't want to hear, you know, the stuff. I don't want to read things. I don't want to know. I just want to stay in my little bubble and stay safe. And I understand that. And that's why I don't go on social media. You know, it is, you do what you need to do to keep yourself psychologically safe. So then when these issues come up, and when I'm trying to say, okay, here's what's going on, it's DABDA. So denial, anger, depression. It's that whole series of emotions that people have to go through to get to the point where they can accept what's actually happening, because then they can say, okay, I can make an educated decision about this. I can either participate or vote or whatever. But when you're stuck in denial or anger or bargaining or depression, before you get to acceptance about whatever issue it is, that's where you're stuck. And so it is a constant, slow education process. And you and I have talked about this, that, there's not enough people out there talking, but there's more now than there were. So
more now than there ever were before. And I do see that kind of that gradual awakening. But yes, I don't know what it's like in your neck of the woods, but most Australians seem to want to just forget everything that happened during COVID. Oh, let's just put that behind us. Yes, it was terrible, but and bad things happen, but oh well, I guess the government just made mistakes.
And that's the denial part, because it also there is also a responsibility that they shirked. You stood up and you pushed back, and I know you took hits for it. There are people who just went along to get along. And as you look back over history, I love the World War II books and things about World War II. And we always hear these romantic, amazing stories about the French resistance and the people who were behind the lines. Every single person sees themselves as that person.
What percentage of the French population were in the resistance?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But everybody wants to be the hero, but they don't understand how difficult it is and how real the opportunity is for you to get badly hurt. And so a lot of people don't stand up. When they ignore it afterwards, it's because they don't want to acknowledge that they didn't stand up.
Yeah, that they actually failed that test. Yeah. Okay. I know I need to let you go. I would happily talk to you all day, but you have another engagement. Is there any last thing that I didn't ask you that you wish that I had asked you?
We got my bill passed, most of it.
Yep.
We will be looking at the sports and spaces next year. I start back in January, and I'm working to shore up my support and make sure that I have all of my senators on board to make sure that our kids are safe in their locker rooms and their bathrooms, and that girls are not being challenged by boys in their sports. The fight continues. I'm also running for election next year because I only finished a 2-year term. And so next year will be the second of my 2-year terms. Then I have to run for a 4-year term. So I've been told that I will be the #1 target in the state.
No doubt. No doubt. Well,
which is kind of flattering, but
yeah, that's right. Like if everyone likes you, you're probably just not doing anything worthwhile, correct? Yeah. Well, look, I want to personally thank you for everything that you're doing for the children in your state. And I guess, once one state gets this legislation passed, it can serve as a kind of domino effect.
And in the United States, we have about 20 states who have gotten this type of legislation passed, and they're being sued and they're fighting. Tennessee but that's okay. Once the lawsuits go through and we win those two, it gives us more and more strength. And that's why it's so very important to put a law on the books, so we can say, here in Nebraska, this is how we do it. Tennessee, they just had their lawsuit overturned. So they are fully banning the surgeries and the drugs. Okay. So again, we're taking steps, we're making progress. We just can't get discouraged with incremental steps to the goal.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. That is a great message to leave our listeners with. Yeah. Thank you so much for being a lioness, for caring about children, your own children, other people's children, any children who could have their lives ruined by these cruel acts, these anti-human, anti-life surgeries and drugs and the ideology behind them. And I hope that we can speak again soon. I feel like we just barely skimmed the surface, but I will leave you to go off to your next appointment. And yes, thanks for all that you're doing. Stay strong.
Thank you so much, Robin.